Hello and welcome to the latest live stream with Bishop Paul, sponsored by MidwestFamily.org. I'm Father Jacob Van Sickle of Protection of the Virgin Mary Church in Maryville, Indiana, here with Vladika Paul to talk this evening about how we can make Lent real in our homes, in our day-to-day lives, and not just something that we see and experience in the churches. So, welcome, Vladika.
Good morning, Father. Good evening, Father. Hi, everybody. I hope your Lent is proceeding in a manner that's pleasing to you. And if not, just always remember, our Lord forgives 70 times 7, and repentance is always there. And I would just encourage you to do the best you can. I kind of had some struggles with this title tonight for this talk. Or this live stream, making Lent real in the home. Well, there's almost like an implication that people may feel Lent is not relevant to their lives, or it's not real to them because the things we're asked to do may seem to be archaic. I'm not sure if that's true, if other people feel that way, but I guess for me, the topic is more like how do we make Lent? How do we bring a Lenten practice alive into our homes? How do we make it, I guess, relevant? I hate that word because relevancy implies that the rules are somehow not right or need to be changed. And I think relevant to me is meaningful, that you get something out of it, so to speak. Uh, and so, and I can only, and I have to reflect upon my early upbringing. First of all, growing up in the Greek Orthodox Church, when we were kids, and maybe this is common to a lot of people, when we talked about Lent, it was like, well, what are you giving up for Lent? Oh, I'm giving up pop. I'm giving up ice cream. I'm giving up sweets. It would kind of revolve around that for kids. And I don't know if that was a parent's way of trying to introduce the practice of Lent to children, but I find that that's not really at all what Lent is about. Um, and I think we have to then understand that Lent's about, how can I put this? Lent is about learning about yourself. It's realizing areas in our life where you fall short in following Christ, and because of prayer and fasting and almsgiving, it enables us to replace those behaviors with other behaviors that are more God-pleasing. And I think the prayer of Saint Ephrem is a perfect example of that prayer. O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, lust of power, and idle talk. But instead, give unto me the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love for thy servant. Right there, you have an idea. If you're going to give up a behavior, you have to replace it with something. And then finally, and grant that I see my own sins and not judge my brother. So in that prayer, you have the task and the focus of Lent totally summarized. And so you're in repenting of a behavior that you don't want to continue once you become aware of it. You then replace it with something that is God-pleasing and brings you more into the contact of being human and being godlike by the grace of God in all that you do, and being an icon of what it means to be a human being, as we learned from this past weekend on the Sunday of Orthodoxy. So I think that's the goal of Lent, and that's the reasons why we have these rules that we have. And I know fasting sometimes can be difficult for people. In the strictest sense of the word, I remember the Greek priest I grew up in the church. He said, you fast from anything that comes from an animal. And so that really included a lot of things. It also included some fish because of the fact there was blood in the fish. So all these things, if you take it in the strictest form, the Lenten fast is to involve not eating meat, not eating dairy products, not having oil, not having wine. And boy, when you do that, I think with some of the lifestyles of family, it can be quite difficult accomplishing that. And from my perspective, boy, families can just refrain from meat and dairy products. I think that's an important thing. That's taking Lent, I think, seriously if we can do that. But again, with fasting, what's the point of it? I mean, it's not just giving up something for the sake of giving up something. I remember a long time ago, one of my parishes, a lady came up to me and said if she could move fasting dates from Tuesday to Thursday because it was easier. And I think one of the things about Lent is it's not meant to be easy. It's not meant to be convenient. It's not meant to kind of like adapt to our life in the sense that, well, it's easier to observe Lent. It doesn't work that way. Lent is a series of self-sacrifice. It's a series of sacrifices. I call them little sacrifices in imitation of Christ. That in many, many ways, we're trying to let go of things that we think we need in order to live. In other words, only to find out these are things that we want. Um, we want these things. We don't need them. And these cravings and urges for certain things in life, whether it be pleasure, entertainment, um, gluttony, having your stomach filled, all these things, we don't need a huge amount of the food that we say we need. We want a cheeseburger, but we don't need one. Um, and so I think we need to kind of make that distinction between what our want is versus what our really need is. And in the famous words of John Chrysostom, we eat to live, we don't live to eat. And that's another way of looking at Lent. What's important to us? What do we seek? What do we value? And I think the fasting really helps us to come to terms with that. But how can we? But all these things, I think the fruit of fasting, if it's really going to be helpful, the fruit of fasting has to be in love. I mean, if we're going to give up something and give up some kind of selfish, self-centered desire, we're going to want to replace that with a desire that wants to do good for others and live for the well-being of another. And that's nothing more than manifested in love. But at the same time, how can we, that's the almsgiving part of Lent, that we give to others instead of demanding for ourselves. But how can we do that without being empowered? And that's where prayer comes into it. Because how can we live Lent without increasing our desire to want to seek God and to know God in a prayer life? Because we can't love each other unless we love God with everything we have. Because once we love God with everything we have, then we learn through the readings in Lent, through the scripture readings on Sundays, through our prayer life, that leads us to love one another. And then to move on, in order to gain knowledge, as we start Lent and continue Lent, as we become aware of things in our life that aren't right, I think another important aspect of Lent is going to confession and having your parish priest witness your repentance and understanding that in coming to confession, you're actually coming to confess your desire to want to follow Christ. It's a positive affirmation. It's a victory over the devil because it's not just about saying, "Oh, I screwed up, have mercy upon me." It's, "Lord, I messed up. I'm coming to you and asking your forgiveness, but I truly want to follow you. I want to do your will." And if we can leave Lent confession with that resolve, we've won a victory over the devil. Now, the question then is how do we make this real in the home? How do we make it relevant in the home? And I think this is where every kind of Lenten practice is like an accordion. I mean, you could stretch it out, or depending on your time, you may press it. You may, I don't know what it is, but you may decrease the size of the accordion to fit and adapt to what you're dealing with in your life. Take like the issue of prayer and saying that the prayer of Saint Ephrem. I mean, I don't know if it's conceivable. I mean, if people are doing morning prayers, maybe they can do the prayer of Saint Ephrem in the morning and one in the evening. But on the other hand, I mean, I don't expect people to doing that prayer in its entirety the whole day. But in the course of doing your work, one of the things you might be able to do is while you're working, you might be able to incorporate the prayer of St. Ephrem into your prayer life. And that's so much about prayer. It's not just about standing with a book in front of an icon and reading prayers. It's incorporating prayer into your daily life in such a way that you're bringing the life of God into everything you do, even to the most tedious of situations. That you're working at a computer during the course of your job when you're whatever you're writing a report for some kind of activity you have to do, or you're interviewing somebody in a human resource interview, or what can I say, you're cooking in a restaurant. I mean, there's ways you can incorporate short prayers in the context of your work, so that it's almost like you're bringing the presence of God into everything you do, into the smallest details of life, and making God present. And that's what we want to do during Lent, is to bring the presence of God into our daily life. And so I think in terms of prayer, if it can only, it's like, I've said this many a time, we breathe without realizing it. But we don't just get up once in the morning and take a deep breath and breathe out, say, okay, I'm good for the rest of the day. We breathe. We have a rhythm of life. We breathe, and our body needs to breathe. And we live because we breathe. I mean, we breathe, and because we breathe, we live. Well, prayer is the same thing to the soul. I mean, we don't just kind of say, Lord, have mercy in the morning, and then say that's good enough. I mean, we have to breathe in our souls like we breathe in our bodies. And so the goal of Lent is to help us do that. And so there's many small things, as I've just mentioned, that you can do during the course of the day to make Lent real. I think another aspect of Lent that's very important, before I go on, I think there were two things I'd like you to read that might be very helpful for you. One is the best book I still ever read is the book by Father Alexander Schmemann, Great Lent. I find his approach to explaining the pre-Sundays, the pre-sanctified liturgies, even the readings on Saturday and Sunday for the Gospel, even a chapter in the Prayer of St. Ephrem itself. It's a wonderful book to read if you want to learn more about Great Lent. The second thing may seem to be a bit strange, but there's a wonderful article by Metropolitan Callistus Ware in the Lenten Triodion about fasting and the meaning of the fast. And one of the things that really struck me about fasting that he said is one of the goals of fasting is to teach us gratitude. And he said, and I remember this always sticks with me, there's nothing more wonderful and joyful than the taste of an egg or cheese on Pascha morning, that you receive it with gratitude and thanksgiving. Whereas a lot of times we just grab for food and we lust for food, and we don't even think about asking God's help and thanking him. But there's something joyful about being able to taste something that you've not had for a while and to receive it in gratitude. And if there's anything that Lent that's important, if there's an important outcome of Lent, it's to teach us to be grateful and thankful for what God has given us. So I think those are some initial comments I have, and I would like to hear from you if you have anything you want me to speak of. I've been writing the last 2 weeks and then today on my weekend kind of once a week notes about Lent and certain practices, so I can comment on those more. But for now, I guess I just want to hear if Father Jacob, are you getting any comments or questions?
Yeah, we do have one, and I do want to just remind everyone, please, you can type questions for Vladika into the chat along the side of the video. And also, let us know if you're having problems with the live stream. It looks on our end like everything is working well, but let us know if there are any issues. The first question, Vladika, comes from Jonathan. He says, in your last blog post, you suggested that we should go through the prayer of St. Ephrem with our children. How do you describe the spirit of chastity to children?
Well, that's one of the things Father Schmemann talks about, which is why you should talk. Chastity is Father Schmemann, I'm just going to rip him off and use his words. Chastity is not just about sexual purity and being morally pure. It's about being whole. It's about being a complete person. It's about not being double-minded. It's having your mind wholly focused on God and not on, I don't know how to put it. I mean, chastity can involve, of course, it can refrain. It can involve, of course, it does imply a sense that you're not indulging yourself in sexual passions and in hunger and longing for foods, where the point that these drives possess you. And one of the things about whatever passions, whether they be sexual passions or hunger and lust for food, hunger for food, is that we lose possession of ourselves. We become incomplete. We're not ourselves anymore. And I think chastity implies a recovery of that wholeness, of that completeness in ourselves. And I would see it in those terms. So chastity, I think, means that you look upon people as having the image of God in them and not lusting after them. What do the commandments say? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. You would not look upon people with the desire to want to possess them as your own. You would not look upon people who want to treat them as an object. I think the common example would be, a pastor sees a doctor show up to church one Sunday and his eyes light up. Oh, more money because he's a doctor, more money because he's a lawyer. And then you become nice to him, not because he's got God's image and likeness in him, but you want money from him. And so you're going to be nice to him to get money, as if that ever really works. But the problem is once you get what you want, then you have no interest in the person. And then, of course, if somebody doesn't have anything to offer, we kind of treat them like a second-class citizen. So we don't see them as real human beings. That's why I think on the last Sunday, the Last Judgment, when we talk about feeding those who are hungry, clothing those who are naked, those who are poor, visiting those who are alone, visiting those in prison, those people have names. And I've often said in my visits to parishes, no matter how much I forget, I try like a Dickens to always want to know a person's name, because then that person becomes real to me. It's no longer an object. It's no longer kind of abstract humanity. And so getting back to the word of chastity, I think there's a sense of wholeness. We want to see people as being made in the image and likeness of God and love them to give what we have for their benefit and well-being, and not to possess them as an object. And that's what lust is. Lust is it's a lust for power, lust for dominance over people. So that's it.
That sounds kind of complicated for a child, though, to me.
Yeah.
Even though maybe it helps explain in ways that
Yeah.
a child, can understand and make use of the idea. How could you simplify it at all?
Well, I
What
mean,
is
what is it that gets fight about? I mean, usually it's what's mine, it's mine, it's not yours. Arguments over possessions, the desire to want to possess what the other person has, toys, the desire to want to compete for parents' attention, arguments over who's right or wrong. Those are certain impulses and drives that children have, and I think the task for parents, which is not easy. A lot of this stuff with young children comes out as pure impulse. It's not socialized. And that's what's frightening. I mean, because they have no previous sense of how to control that. As parents, you have to teach them how to deal with those impulses. You have to teach them how to manage those drives. And so those are some of the things I can think of with kids in daily life. I mean, I think it's another story, and I don't know whether I want to get into this, but when kids start to explore their bodies and wonder who they are, there's a certain element of sexual curiosity that is going to come upon kids. And I think it's important as parents, we don't wipe and strike them off the face of the earth because they have that interest and curiosity. We have to help them understand what these drives are and how they are to manage them, and not just freak out because you may see a kid ask a certain question or act in a certain way that would alarm you. That's the thing about raising young children, is that they have impulses and drives that are kind of, I wouldn't say normal. I mean, they're instinctual. They're a part of how they've come into this world. And our job as Orthodox Christians is to form and shape Christian habits among children. And so I would look at the prayer of Saint Ephrem and defining some of these titles in terms of how can they have developed better habits. You know, what is sloth? What is despair? You know, what is lust of power? I mean, I agree. We have to find ways to communicate those words to children in a language they can understand. But I think the most important thing here is if you're going to ask a kid not to be slothful, not to despair, then you can't be despairing. You know what I mean? If you're going to ask a kid to control his anger, you can't be out of control when you tell him to shut up and stop hitting your brother. You can't hit your kid and say, cut it out when he's hitting his brother. You have to show the same example, you know. And so if we're going to teach our kids certain habits, we have to be able to model those same habits with them and live by them. If you want your kids to settle down at night when they go to bed, don't yell and scream at them because they're yelling and screaming. You have to set a tone by your example and give them direction and enforce your expectations in a way that doesn't feed your own passions, because you're going to teach them nothing about acquiring certain habits of self-control and certain virtues. And of course that's not easy, because I think the thing that's tough with young kids is this is pure impulse. And so that can be alarming to parents if they've never dealt with their own impulses in a certain way. If they have trouble with expressing anger, if they have trouble with despair and laziness, it's going to be hard to teach your child that, you know. So, anyways, I don't know if I made that relevant, but that's how I kind of look at it with kids, and how do you start doing that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Vladika. Another question from Elizabeth. She says, I have a 2-year-old. Should he be following a strict fast? And maybe just give us some general guidelines for, you know, easing children into...
Well, you know, an interesting thing with fasting, a lot of it, you know, it depends on if you have a husband who's a believer and you're all on the same page. If you have 2 income families that are working, I realize that poses some challenges. But on one hand, I would just honestly say that one of the things that we're missing today about a domestic household is the idea that mom had control of the meals and you ate what was put on the table. And I think when you have that kind of control over what is put on the table, I don't think fasting is as difficult. I was at the Serbian church in Akron Sunday night, and they put out a wonderful spread of food for us that was all fasting food. There were no dairy products, and it was all very good and very tasty fasting meals. But somebody took the time to prepare those meals. So the question then becomes, what do you adapt for kids? Like for a 2-year-old, you know, how are they going to understand fasting? You know, I think that's a good question. I've even said, take like on Sunday morning, I've said in some of my past notes, you know, for children maybe under 18 months old, I don't expect them to understand the idea of not having anything before communion. I mean, if they need something, they can bring a bag of little Cheerios to give them to kind of munch on. Especially for kids under, I would even say a year or under, that just need something, or 12 months, you know, 15 months under, just need something. They're not going to have any concept of fasting. But I think somewhere along the line, and I don't know where this begins, I mean, you know, you have the terrible twos where kids want to assert their kind of control and don't want to do what mom and dad says. But, you know, I think one of the things that sometimes surprises me is how many people don't fast before communion. And I think that's an important thing that we teach from midnight on. We should fast. What do you do with a 2-year-old? I think you try and see if he can do that. And if he starts getting, I don't know, if he starts getting temperamental and it's clear that he can't do it, maybe you allow him to have a little glass of milk or some juice. But you don't try and just kind of, you don't go from a glass of milk to bacon and eggs and toast, you know. I think getting a kid into the habit of fasting especially if the mother can control the meals, is not so difficult. I really think it can work because I've seen it happen. Now, as an adult, I remember when lived at a monastery for a year. Fasting was easy. Why? Because we went to church together, we worked together, we prayed together, but more importantly, the food was cooked by a cook that followed the rules. And I'd have to honestly say, even on the serious fasting days where we were very strict, I thoroughly enjoyed having a bowl of soup. And I received it with joy and gratitude because we worked. And we came and we needed nourishment and we received nourishment and we went back to our tasks. Now, I think what's tough in this day and age is, especially for older kids, is that they go to school and they see other kids following habits that are and lifestyles that are contrary to what the church teaches. And so kids naturally want to fit into their group, and this probably poses some challenges for parents. Um, but I'm getting back to the 2-year-old. I would kind of, I don't know how you wean somebody into the practice of fasting. I think you try and look for their ability to developmentally understand the concept of fasting, at least. So is 2-year-old too young? Well, if the food is being controlled by who does the cooking, it's not too young because they're just going to accept this as a natural part of family life. You've had kids, Father Jacob. You've had to go through this. What has your experience been? You'd be more reliable than I would since I'm not married and don't have kids. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that we're the exemplary family, Vladika, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's what you say about just they eat what's prepared is that does go a long way. I think if you're eating meals as a family and you prepare a meal that's fasting, then it's a fasting meal, and
Mm-hmm.
our kids, typically get used to that. Um, Now we don't, we don't have them keep strict fasts. Otherwise, like when we pack their lunches, it's not always a strict. We can have them keep a meatless fast during all of the fasting seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and we usually don't offer them dairy when they're sharing a meal with us.
Mm-hmm.
Although occasionally there might be some on the side,
Mm-hmm.
but otherwise we aren't very strict with them.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of keeping a pre-communion fast, our oldest is 10 now, and we started getting him to do that when he was 6.
Mm-hmm.
We waited until then.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that after he started doing it, became much easier with the younger ones because they saw him doing it.
All right,
And so for them, we were able to do them younger because it just
That's
became
interesting.
became what we did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they saw the older one doing it, and so it was less of a fight. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something we had to fight
Yeah.
about.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I say, everything you say around, I think around 7 is really a time when you can introduce it because but I do think you have to be careful that you just don't. I think there should be something to be said about the idea of giving something light. If parents feel they don't want to have their kids go without eating something, it should be light. It shouldn't be like a regular meal. I mean, kids need to be reminded about the specialness about receiving the Lord's body and blood. And the idea is to be hungry for His body and blood
Mm-hmm.
and not for food. I think, it's really tough. The passions in our culture, there's so much in which our needs are gratified. I want it my way. And I think that's what's tough. What I think fasting is seeking to accomplish is to find ways that we can kind of purge that sense of it's got to be my way and to enter into a reality where it's God's way. And for young kids, that's a hard thing to understand sometimes. And that's why I keep on saying that the best thing you can do for your young kids is set an example yourselves, and use your judgment. So,
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Vladika. We have another question. Claudia says, I was Protestant and I'm very new to Orthodoxy. I want to make the most of Lent, but it seems like there's a lot that I don't know. It's like I don't know what I don't know. Do you have recommendations for online resources, especially she's asking for, to give her a good overview, something that she can access easily?
Online review. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of things. I mean, I guess you have to do your own searching. You really first need to talk with your parish priest. That's really important. I mean, as you're trying to figure out what to do during Lent, your first conversation should be with him. And because he's close to you and connected, maybe he might be able to recommend some resources. I think one of the things I can say about fasting is that, and I've used this analogy many a time, if you've not been used to fasting, you move into it gradually. For example, if I'm overweight right now, so if I were ever to start running, I wouldn't try and run 2 miles because I'd probably kill myself. I would run maybe 200 feet and then walk, and then I would slowly increase it to the point that eventually, because I'm running regularly and taking better care of myself, I would be able to run probably 3 or 4 miles in about maybe 6 months. Sit-ups, if I'm going to do sit-ups, I'm not going to try and do 15. I may only start with doing 3 or 4. Now, sit-ups is not a good example. Sit-ups, so you're not going to try and do 100 when you haven't been doing them. You're going to start with 2 or 3 and add a little bit. It's the same thing with fasting. If you've not been used to fasting, maybe you just first start with not eating meat on Wednesday and Friday. And then you move into going without meat and dairy on Wednesday and Friday. And if you're in a Lenten period, then maybe you might consider the strict fast on Wednesday and Friday, no meat during the week, and then on the weekend, this is part of a movement into Lent. I'm not trying to kind of say this is okay to do. But then on the weekends, you might relax a fast and allow certain foods. But then the next step will be, well, then maybe you move from a complete meatless and dairy Monday through Friday, meatless and without dairy Monday through Friday, and then allow dairy on the weekend. And so when the next Lent comes around, you may do meatless and dairy the entire course of the fast. So in terms of how you approach it, I think you do it gradually based on what you're able to handle. But more importantly, talk to your priest. He's there to help you figure out what to do. A lot of times families want to make up their own rules, and I think if you're looking to adapt the fast, it's very important you talk to your parish priest, and he can help you do that. Because the goal is not to kind of just look at it legalistically. Oh, the priest told me I could do this. It's not about that. It's about the idea of how do you get into a rhythm of life that involves you renouncing certain habits and passions and desires and putting on habits that are godly. It's Christian formation. It's being formed according to the image of Christ. And I think this is what the Lenten seasons give us the opportunity to do. And then to carry that over. I mean, one of the things about Lent, Father and I were talking about this before we went online. It's not like, okay, 40 days, I got to be charitable and kind, but when Lent is over, I can go back to being the way I was. That's not the point of it. The point of this is to come into touch with a Paschal, is to come into a reconnection of our Paschal life of being baptized into Christ and putting on Christ and living in the joy of that reality, so that, maybe in terms of a process towards acquiring the divine nature, we would, by the grace of God, take a few steps up. And so maybe the battles will be different at the next Lent. I've often kind of thought that, I've always been amazed by some of the lives of the greatest saints who lived very holy lives, and yet just before they died, they'd say things like, I haven't even begun to repent. And I think one of the things that happens is a paradox to the Christian life. The more you draw closer to Christ, you become more and more aware of how even the tiniest of sins is devastating. You know, it's not like, well, I don't do those things anymore. When you draw close to Christ, you become more and more aware of how devastating sin is. A thought you entertain, even the smallest of sins, for holy people, I think, become very devastating. And so that's why they're repenting, even to their death, because they see the damage sin does. I mean, we just went through the canon of St. Andrew last week, and you have all these, you have, like I think one of the verses about King David. David committed adultery with his wife, with his wife to be Bathsheba, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had her husband killed in battle. He arranged for it, and so. But then the verse talks about, but you're even worse than David because you have sins you haven't repented of. And so me, I've never done that. What do you mean I'm worse than David? And I didn't have anybody. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't have somebody's husband killed. See, we can take with that attitude, but the reality is the smallest of sins bring great damage to the world, and David understood that. And he continued to repent. It just didn't happen once. He continued a life of repentance. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point for any kind of growth in the spiritual life or in otherwise. It reminds me of text of Saint Basil. He quotes from the book of Proverbs where it says, "I said I would be wise, and it was removed far from me." That's the scripture.
Wow.
And he says, it's not that he became stupider, right? What Solomon is saying is the wiser he got, the more he realized how foolish he was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to explain how this is the whole life, that the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know.
Yeah.
And that's true in spiritual things. It's actually, I would say it's true in anything. Talk to anybody who's spent a whole lifetime studying something, and they will tell you about all the things they don't know.
Yeah.
Because that's what you come to learn is how little you know rather than the more. Anyway.
Well, but to finally give a quick answer to Claudia's question, I would just encourage you to get a copy of Great Lent by Father Schmemann. I can't think of any better resource to get her through Lent than that. And it's available from SVS, St. Vladimir Seminary Press.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Very good. We have another question, a non-Lenten question, although I don't know, maybe we can figure out a way that this is Lenten. Jonathan says, his daughter asks why bishops have to be unmarried.
Well, I mean, they don't have to be. I mean, as we know, in the early churches, Peter had a wife, and the early bishops up to about the 4th century, there were married bishops in the church. But I think one of the things that happened is that as the church became bigger, and in the 4th century, you had a whole increase of monastic life. And I think monastic life is important only in the sense that the monasteries and monks, they existed where they gave up everything to follow Christ and renounced anything that they called their own to live in community with other men and to grow in Christ together and to live a life of chastity, to live a life of poverty, to live a life of hospitality, to live a life of work, to live a life of prayer, and to seek his kingdom and his righteousness. With joy, what did Jesus tell that young rich man? You lack one thing, sell all you have and give to the poor and come follow me and have treasure in heaven. So monks grew out of this desire to want to preserve the essence of the Christian gospel, and especially during a time when Christianity became legal. Well, nobody had to pay a price to be a Christian anymore. They could just join the church and they got in and there was no cost involved. So I think monasticism grew out of that desire to want to preserve the fullness of the gospel message of what it means to give all to follow Christ. So getting back to the issue of bishops, as churches became bigger and bishops traveled, well, there is a problem with a priest who has young children being a bishop and traveling. at that point, he fails in being a father to his children because he's constantly on the road. I can tell you, if you know my schedule, I'm gone a whole lot of time. If I were to be a younger man with young children, there's no way I would be doing a disservice to my children and becoming an absentee father. And I think one of the things that's very important with priests and their families is there's so much resentment among children that grow up in a priest family because they give up everything, including their time with family, to serve the church. And sometimes that leaves a lot of hard feelings with children who have grown up in an Orthodox family and have had to encounter this behavior where they're treated like, well, you're a priest kid, you're supposed to act this way. And I think that, so I'm trying to get back to answering your question. It's just not conducive to have a married bishop today in the world that bishops have to live in. And so we try and take the bishops from the ranks of monastics or from widowed clergy who no longer have a wife and the kids have grown up. Now, personally, if we ever got to the point that we couldn't find bishops, I would be in favor of having a married bishop becoming consecrated so long as they raise their children and the children are on their own and self-reliant. The wife could travel with them on visits, but that's a discipline that this Holy Synod has to deal with. That can be changed. It's not a dogmatic, it's not something that bishops don't have to be single. But right now, that is a practice of the church. That bishops either need to be a monk, they need to be celibate, they need to be widowed, but they have to, and then there all have been some cases of marriages where the wife and the husband have agreed to split up and they go to different monasteries. And so it could be conceivable that somebody could be a bishop that way. But it's just not practical today. When you ask why what can't we have married bishops? It just does not fit. The demands of the episcopacy come at the expense of, I think, doing harm to children. If we were to have fathers raising their children becoming bishops, I think I would worry about the well-being of the wife and the children because of how often they're gone. So that's my answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to that last thing that you said though about the couple deciding to sort of part. That's actually provided for in, I forget when I studied canon law in seminary.
Yeah.
There was a canon that said it was permissible to elect a married man to the episcopacy provided that he and his wife were both willing to do that.
Yeah, right.
And then he could become. I haven't heard of that happening.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, it's yeah. I have to admit, in this country, it's hard coming up with candidates for bishops because, I've said this many a time in my talks with people. If there's an American anthem this country lives by, it's a Frank Sinatra song. I did it my way. And when you look about the idea of the Christian life, it's self-denial. It's carrying a cross. It's saying, not my way, but thy will be done. It's God's way. Now that was Christ's great temptation at Gethsemane. If it's possible, take this cup away from me. But it's not my will, but thy will that matters. And so, I think what's tough in America, and especially in getting certain practices established, is we're such a country of individualism. I have rights. You can't tell me what to do. I can do what I want. And all that is really it's contrary to the Christian life. And that's why we so much need Lent. But I can see why, we're such a, it's all about the American dream. And so parents want their children to go to college, get a college degree, get a good job, get married, have kids. And it's very hard, I think, in this aura of the American dream to see the monastic vocation as a wonderful alternative to Christian life. Because a monk is somebody who becomes poor. A monk is somebody who doesn't have anything. He doesn't have children, in most cases. And so that's a different kind of life that doesn't quite fit the American dream, in my opinion.
David asks what your favorite Lenten services, Ladika. Says this is his family's first Lent. He's a catechumen.
Oh, without a doubt, the sanctified liturgy. I think it's beautiful. The way we go through the motions. As a priest, I love celebrating the transfer of the gifts, the hymnography, the songs we sung, and the fact that prayer really, it kind of goes. It goes in a nice, smooth way. It's not overtly long. It's you can do it per sanctified in about hour 20 minutes, hour 10 minutes. And then it's that wonderful ability to get together in a Lenten meal with other people in the church and have a joyful gathering. So without a doubt, I would say it's the sanctified liturgies that are my favorite. The canon, I think, is wonderful, but you know what? I've been now attending the canon for probably 25 years, 25, 26 years, a lot less than other clergy. But it's only about after 10 years of hearing the canon that I begin learning about it. It's a hard service to go to, especially if you have a real bad opinion of yourself and you have all these accounts of people beating up on themselves for their sins. And for somebody who really struggles with all that and does that enough of that in their own life, maybe in the beginning it's not that you need to talk to your parish priest first. But maybe it might be good if you're new at being Orthodox to hold off on going to the canon until you've gotten more settled into the rest of the church. Because it is not an easy service to attend. If you're not approaching with the right reason, with the right spirit, that can seem like, man, what's this got to do with Christ? You're just beating up on yourself. What good is that? But you have to look deeper. You have to be more steeped in the life of the church. So I think to get benefit from that. And even me, who's grown up in the church all my life, we didn't do the canon of St. Andrew in the Greek church during the first week of Lent. I don't know how many Greek churches do it. But more and more, it's coming into practice now. More and more churches, I think, are doing the canon. But I kind of think, I think it's very important somebody talk with their priest about that, about when they should start attending the canon and when they might be ready for it.
He says that they enjoyed the canon very much last week. He says that their family enjoyed the canon very much last week.
Okay.
Yeah. Another question from Elizabeth. As we make it a point to pray more during the Lenten season, what would be a good morning or bedtime prayer for small children? She's the one that had the 2-year-old before.
Yeah, wow. Well, very simple. I mean, I don't know. What can we... Even just saying the Jesus prayer. I mean, a short prayer for a 2-year-old kid, saying the Jesus prayer. Even praying the prayer of St. Ephraim. Here's this important thing we don't have to take St. Ephraim's prayer and turn it into baby talk. One of the things that, we talk about in church is we need to have a children's service to make it relevant for them. But you know what? Jesus, when I read the gospel on Holy Thursday, when Jesus is talking, the first gospel, the real long one that people faint at sometimes, and Jesus says, I have many things to tell you. You cannot bear them now. You cannot hear them now. It's okay that kids don't get it all the time. It's okay that they don't understand it. This is something they grow into over time. So we don't want to over-rationalize the service. So that somehow we want to try and how can I put it, kid-proof everything that somehow it loses its meaning. And so, I don't know, simple prayers, I think the prayer of St. Ephraim is a good thing to say. They're not going to understand it, but they're going to hear your voice. They're going to hear the tone by which you say it. And it's a very important. You say that in a calming and loving way, and not say your prayers. It's time to say your prayers. We have to do your prayers. I mean, I think it's more in what spirit do you offer the prayer. But I agree, for a 2-year-old, even getting the child to say, ask Jesus to have mercy upon you. Ask, and then maybe for the kid, who do you want to pray for if they're able to talk? Johnny, who do you want to pray for? Who do you want God to show his love to? very basic kind of questions. I mean, it'll all come, I think, in time, but I have to admit, it's very scary, I think, in this time regarding how you mold. I mean, this area, even at 2 years old, about teaching kids how to pray, you're starting to form a habit in their life. And I think that's a very frightening thing sometimes.
Yeah, I would add that in our experience with prayers that the kids don't understand, what they really get into is the movements. So, like with the prayer of Saint Ephrem, kids love to make prostrations.
Yeah,
I think, and they love to bow. At places like,
Mhm.
and that they see and they emulate and they really get into even before they can understand the words.
I mean, I constantly see that in churches where people that go to church and they have the right spirit and right mind, the kids will kiss the icons without anybody having a parent trying to force them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do it because they see mom doing it and they want to do it, and then they see little kids doing it and then they want to do it. And so, I mean, you could show them. I think that would be appropriate, that even if they could do a couple prostrations, I mean, this is Jesus here, and we're praying to Jesus for him to help us. We need to show how much we love Jesus by getting on our knees and bowing before him.
Yeah. Jonathan again asks, can you explain the significance of your medallion necklace?
Oh, this is called a panagia. And the word panagia means all holy. Okay, and I don't know how well you see it, but any bishop, most of them always wear this. It'll be an icon of the Mother, a Mother of God, and Jesus. And
Maybe you could bring it closer to the.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
And so this is something that's kind of like our ID badge.
Maybe tilt it forward.
Oh,
I think the light.
Like that?
There you go. They can see it much better now. Yeah.
It's like our ID badge. A policeman, when what do you ask him for? You ask him for his badge to show he's a legitimate cop. Well, as you can see, look at Father Jacob. He's wearing. Well, you can't see him. Yeah, he's got a cross he's wearing. Orthodox priests in the Orthodox Church in America always wear a pictorial cross. And this is a sign to identify them as an Orthodox priest. For a bishop, it's this called the Panagia, all holy. And this identifies us as a bishop. You won't see Father Jacob wearing this because he's not a bishop. The people that wear Panagias are going to be bishops. I don't know, in terms of why we're given that. I mean, of course. I mean, what else? The Mother of God for us is the ultimate example for Christians because she's the one that is more. She contained the uncontainable God in her. And she directs us to follow her Son by saying yes to God about bearing him to the work, bearing him in her womb, and bearing him for the sake of our salvation. She says, let it be to me according to your word. Again, not my way, but your will be done. And so as bishops, we're called to live to be, by his grace and help, to be a witness to that same reality and to remind us of that as we carry this icon of Mary with Jesus, we're called to bear Christ to the world in our own office and how we exercise our office.
Very good. Well, last call for questions. We've got a few minutes left. David asks, what is your favorite or staple fasting food?
My favorite staple or fasting food.
Your go-to meal.
My go-to meal. Boy. I think, I'll always go with some kind of vegetable, shrimp or squid dish. I mean, a vegetarian stir fry. You can have a vegetarian stir fry with squid or shrimp. I would say that'd be my favorite meal. I like Arabic food. I like hummus. I like what are the round balls thing? The round things that are green on the inside. The meatballs, the vegetarian Arabic meatballs. What are they called?
Falafel.
Falafel. Yeah. You know, spinach pies with spinach. I mean, those are some of the foods, yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, I guess now's a good time to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time. And I know it was kind of a strange time to do it on Tuesday, but Sunday nights now are taking up with the Sunday evening vespers. So I don't know when we're going to do the next live feed because the closer we get, we might be able to do something in April. But if we do, we're going to have to do it during the week and not on Sunday because just every Sunday night something's going on, and I'm somewhere. I'm going to be going to a vesper service, so that's why we picked this night.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully we can get I feel bad about getting the notice out on the webpage so late. We'll try and get that out sooner. Okay. So God bless you. Please forgive me a sinner and pray for me, and you'll hear my hearts and prayers. And may the Lord continue with. May the Lord bless you with a journey. In Lent that leads you to gain more awareness of where you're falling short, to repent, and to joyfully profess your desire to follow Christ, which can lead us to this wonderful celebration on Holy Pascha. Good night.
Good night.